Therefore, you can't assume that someone is your suspect in a crime just because you search their home, car, or other stuff. It just indicates that there is probably proof of the crime there. The FBI just revealed something shocking. Everybody thought David was the monster responsible for Celeste Rivas's demise. However, after raiding his home and now his vehicle, the case completely collapsed. He is not the murderer, according to the facts. Who did it then, and why was he set up? I know the whole thing. Let's begin. When being honest goes completely wrong. Remember when it was first reported that a decomposing body had been discovered in a Tesla that belonged to the singer? That song seemed like some sort of movie scenario, dude. However, when you're coping with such dire circumstances, real life is striking you differently. Significant progress has been made in the case of singer David and the body discovered in his Tesla. After executing a search warrant, police searched the home where he was reportedly residing and took what might have been evidence with them. On a typical Monday morning, September 8, 2025, some employees at this Hollywood establishment began to smell something really bad emanating from this black Tesla Model 3, which had been sitting there for a few days. This was the beginning of the whole problem. This whip was registered under David Anthony Burke and has Texas plates. For those who don't know, that's David's official name. Before someone reported the automobile as abandoned and had it towed, it had been parked on a Hollywood Hill street for over 72 hours. Check this out now. The circumstances behind this Tesla's abandonment were dubious from the start. For weeks, some neighbors have been informing others that this automobile has been circling the hills in various locations, as if someone were performing a song about parking spaces or something. Random cars resting on their blocks are not a game to these wealthy people up in the hills. They were monitoring this problem long before it became bad, you know. The entire game was shaking inside the front trunk when the tow yard workers eventually opened it. Inside, wrapped in a sack of some sort, were the mutilated and badly decomposed remains of a teenage girl. It took the coroner over a week to identify the body since it was in such poor condition, and it was just a small tattoo on her right index finger that allowed them to identify her. And later on, that detail will be crucial. Yes, she was essentially describing how one of Celeste's distinguishing characteristics was a red tattoo on her finger, which she described to us and which we subsequently forwarded to the LAPD. The LAPD's Robbery-Homicide Division quickly intervened after this revelation, alerting everyone that this was no longer a typical missing person investigation. The body had been in that whip for a minute since it was so degraded. Investigators had some really uneasy questions about how this whole thing happened because we were talking about weeks or perhaps months. David was performing hundreds of miles away as part of his Record Withered tour at the time all of this was happening. Given that he had been on tour for more than a month before the body's discovery, the timing appeared to provide him with an alibi. His associates quickly released comments highlighting that Homeboy had been playing in front of hundreds of people and claiming that he was assisting the police. It is obvious that he was not involved in any of the events. The majority of people at first supported David hard, including fans, business people, and even some members of the media. Like a true bootstrap narrative, this cat had established his reputation as a family-friendly, wholesome artist who started from nothing and made beats on his iPhone and in his sister's closet. He became well known after his successful romantic murder, signed with Interscope, and began working with well-known people like Zazier and Keys. People said, "Nah, that ain't it," when the news initially emerged. Most people simply assumed that this young man, who appeared to be harmless, couldn't have been involved in something so dark. When it first came out, I even told a friend, I feel like the Fortnite kid, who was pretty normal, didn't do something like this, since that's what I always thought he did. However, that might not be true. Part of the reason David's fan following liked him so much was his entire come-up tale. He began creating Fortnite material before turning to music since he required rhythms for his gaming videos that wouldn't violate copyright laws. He was born David Anthony Burke in Houston. In contrast to these other industry plants who come from money, he was popular among young people because of his modest, unassuming demeanor and his grassroots hustle. However, when more information became available, the story started to change significantly. At first, the LAPD claimed that the Tesla was one of several whips that David owned, and that several members of his social circle had access to any of the vehicles, which may have helped to keep him somewhat apart from whatever happened. This statement gave the impression that anyone on his crew, including his management, friends, and fellow musicians, could have been utilizing the vehicle. However, some behind-the-scenes actions were revealing a different tale, despite the public pronouncements' attempts to maintain objectivity. Even though no charges had been brought against David Quick yet, major brands such as Hollister and Crocs began severing their connections with him, withdrawing their campaigns and partnerships. When companies begin to remove themselves so quickly, you can be sure they have some inside information that makes them anxious about being linked to someone. The fact that TMZ located and spoke with the victim's mother was the true turning point. This woman gave information that the police had not yet made public, and everyone's perspective on the matter was entirely altered by what she said. She confessed that her daughter had been seeing someone named David prior to her disappearance, which was shocking in addition to confirming that the chateau matched her daughter's. Furthermore, and perhaps more significantly, she stated that Celeste, at the very least, gave her the appearance that Celeste was seeing a man named David, and that it was the final time she saw him after hanging out with him multiple times. Investigators were rushing to put together a timeline after this revelation, which would ultimately uncover some very sinister material for which no one was ready. Celeste Rivas Hernandez, a 15-year-old from Lake Elsinore, California, was identified as the victim. She had been reported missing several times in 2024, most recently in April when she was only 14 years old. The fact that her body was found on September 8th, the day after her supposed 15th birthday, was just plain unsettling. Her remains were discovered just one day after the little girl should have been enjoying turning 15, and she never even got to see it. Because of the unfortunate timing, authorities questioned whether the date had any particular significance for the person who caused her harm. As soon as the victim's identity was known, the inquiry got underway. The residence David had been residing at, which was rented by his management but where the singer spent the majority of his time, became the focus of police attention. There were several concerns raised by the fact that this house was fewer than 100 feet from the location where the Tesla was abandoned. The place where that Tesla was dumped was a story in and of itself. Professional criminals typically take great care to dispose of evidence in a location that is far from any potential connections. However, this car with a decaying body was parked almost directly outside the spot where David was resting his head. That kind of close proximity either indicated that the person was extremely careless or that they were in such a panic that they were unable to think clearly and simply disposed of the car as close to their home as possible. The streets were talking about the digital proof. A full digital paper trail that revealed the most unsettling picture of what had been happening between the adolescent, victim, and the rising music star emerged when the inquiry into young Celeste's death truly got going. What began as mere social media speculation swiftly evolved into a methodical revelation of relationships dating back years, revealing a pattern that started when Celeste was only a young child. The most damning proof came directly from David's Discord channel, where he was seen conversing with a member named Celeste as early as 2021 in chats that had been stored. These digital traces were going to be essential in demonstrating that David had known the victim for years, beginning when she was perhaps 11 or 12 years old, and that their relationship had lasted for years. Later, the Discord moderators who oversaw David's group attempted to hide their identities by saying they believed Celeste to be 18 or 19 and were unaware that she was a 15-year-old who had gone missing. But the evidence was already pointing to a far more twisted reality. What any streetwise individual would identify as standard grooming conduct was exposed in the Discord messages. According to others who had access to these chats from the archives, Celeste and David began communicating via Roblox when she was about 11 years old. As their relationship progressed, they switched to Discord and other platforms. Any parent in the neighborhood is aware of the ways in which these predators work online. Conversations begin on kid-friendly platforms and then progressively shift to more private settings. Investigators heavily focused on the matching tattoos as a key piece of evidence. Investigators suspect that the identical tattoos on David and Celeste's right index fingers were a covert symbol for their covert relationship. Now, these kinds of tattoos aren't entirely original. Similar ones were gotten by celebrities like Lindsay Lohan, Cher Lloyd, and Rihanna. But the placement, time, and context of these particular tattoos were creating a lot of doubts about the true nature of their relationship. And that's just one of the numerous still and moving pictures that have been making the rounds on social media in recent weeks. There appears to be a very strong digital trail that includes still photos shot in several locales dating back at least to early 2024, as well as backstage photos from his concerts and live streams. The investigators' discovery of musical ties, however, was the most unsettling evidence. Celeste is the name of the leaked demo that David purportedly recorded in December 2023. Additionally, the song's lyrics were blatantly indecent and obsessive. There were lyrics in the song that seemed to allude to both the tattoo situation and an intimate connection, such as, "Oh, Celeste, the girl with my name tattooed on her chest. Smell her on my clothes like cigarettes. I hear her voice each time I take a breath. I'm obsessed." Given the date, the lyrics of this unreleased song were very concerning. A relationship that had crossed many unacceptable boundaries was depicted by the references to physical intimacy and possessive, obsessive language. The fact that this song was purportedly recorded in late 2023, when Celeste would have just been 13 or 14 years old, raised considerable concerns among investigators about their true relationship. The timing of David's music releases was another trend that got people talking in the streets. Celeste's birthday fell on September 7, 2022, the same day his romantic homicide music video was released. Furthermore, this was not a one-time incident. It became apparent to others that David had a tendency to schedule significant releases around Celeste's birthday, indicating a degree of planning and preoccupation that was much above any typical friendship. Release dates in the music industry are typically determined by industry scheduling, chart placing, and marketing strategy. It was exceedingly unusual for any business relationship to have personal significance, as seen by David's apparent timing of significant releases around this young girl's birthday. Additionally, it was supporting theories regarding the depth of their relationship. You were trained by him. No, you didn't. That is debatable. It's contentious among children. Excellent. It has been a positive one. Goodbye. Goodbye, everyone. Mwah. Oh my. Delete everything. Remove. Delete everything. Everything happens. Everything. The digital evidence extended beyond music releases and Discord. Investigators using social media discovered numerous images and videos of David with a female who resembled Celeste, typically with her face obscured or turned away from the camera. According to reports, some of these photos were taken from leaked iCloud files that showed what seemed to be a continuous relationship at various times and places, including private houses and concert backstage areas. What looked to be a joint live feed with David and Celeste interacting with followers and answering questions jointly was one piece of evidence that truly got the streets talking. Theories regarding their continued relationship were further supported by this film, which was purportedly taken in January 2024 and showed them acting at ease and acquainted with one another. The subsequent removal of this feed sparked speculation about whether more evidence might have been purposefully hidden from the public eye. A former Celeste middle school teacher's testimonial, which went viral on TikTok, was one of the most important. She described how Celeste had informed other pupils about meeting David online when she was barely 13 years old. This teacher claims that Celeste ran away to live with David in Hollywood, was apprehended by the authorities, and was returned home, only to vanish once more in 2024. Crucial background information for comprehending the chronology and the increasing trend of Celeste's disappearances was supplied by this testimony, because it provided independent confirmation of David and Celeste's relationship from someone who had no apparent motive to lie about it. This teacher's revelation was especially significant. It was unclear what interventions might have been tried because the fact that this material had been discussed in a classroom as part of a warning about online safety implied that at least some of the adults Celeste knew about her predicament, Celeste had been reported missing at least 4 times in 2024, according to the study, and each disappearance may have been related to her relationship with David. According to what her brother told investigators, she was leaving their family home to go to a movie with someone named David the last time he saw her, and they were both riding in the same Tesla that would later be used to find her body. This particular detail was especially unsettling because it implied that the car that would eventually become her grave was also the means of transportation for her during what may have been her last voluntary departure from home. Analysis of social media showed even more unsettling trends in David's online conduct. Investigators found his TikTok reposts to contain disturbing content, such as violent and possessive films that gained additional significance in light of the inquiry. According to reports, one especially unsettling repost contained references to cannibalism and eating a dead lover, while another purportedly featured content about violence and envy in relationships, themes that would later seem prophetic given how Celeste was discovered. All of this digital information combined to create a picture of a relationship that had been hidden for years but was chronicled on various platforms. Not only was there evidence of communication between Celeste and David, but there was also a record of what seemed to be a systematic grooming operation that had progressively progressed from the first online interactions to in-person meetings, disappearances, and finally catastrophe. The raid that revealed everything. When LAPD homicide detectives obtained a search warrant for the Hollywood Hills residence where David had been placed, the entire matter reached a breaking point on September 17, 2025. This was not your typical knock-and-talk scenario. Several specialist troops participated in this extensive raid, which lasted for several hours. The findings of that search significantly altered the course of the case. Is it possible that she will discover proof of what transpired? And then to see who else was, because I heard from a neighbor that a lot of people were coming and leaving from this house. It's clear that he had acquaintances who lived there. Therefore, it's not a given that it was David. Perhaps there was another person that was visiting the house. We're not sure. The process of obtaining that search warrant wasn't easy. Investigators had to persuade a judge that there would be evidence of a crime at the property and demonstrate probable cause that connected the property to Celeste's death. The fact that they were able to satisfy that legal requirement indicated that they had strong evidence linking the young girl's fate to this location in the Hollywood Hills. They ran up on a very serious house. Through his manager, David had been renting a $4.1 million property for $20,000 per month. However, the location's closeness to the abandoned Tesla location, less than 100 feet away, made it more noteworthy. Given the close proximity, it was immediately unclear how the car got to be almost at his home, indicating either excessive negligence or rash decisions. Investigators had spent weeks developing their case and assembling evidence to show to the judge in preparation for this raid. Legal experts noted that in order to obtain a search warrant, one must demonstrate both that there was reasonable cause for a crime to have been committed and that the site under search will provide evidence of that crime. Investigators had some solid evidence linking this house to Celeste's death because they had overcome this legal obstacle. Investigators found numerous computers, electronic gadgets, and evidence bags during the thorough search. As digital forensics specialists started the laborious process of examining years' worth of correspondence, images, and other digital data that might shed light on David and Celeste's relationship, these devices were anticipated to be essential to the inquiry. The entire digital record of their communications, including possibly erased messages, images, and other information that would help determine the time frame and character of their relationship, was anticipated to be on the confiscated laptops. To get a search warrant, you must be able to convince a judge that you have reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed and that the location you plan to investigate will provide evidence of that crime. Therefore, you can't assume that someone is your suspect in a crime just because you search their home, car, or other stuff. It just indicates that there is probably proof of the crime there. What the detectives were expressly searching for was one of the most striking details of the raid. According to people familiar with the case, investigators were looking for blood evidence, indicating that they thought this residence might have been the scene of Celeste's murder or the location where her body was prepared. before being put in that Tesla. Luminol. Testing and other forensic methods intended to find biological evidence that may have been concealed or cleaned up were part of the systematic search. Because some chemical reactions can identify minuscule remnants that are invisible to the human eye, this kind of specialist testing can uncover blood evidence even after it has been thoroughly cleaned. Areas where a body might have been hidden or stored before being transferred to the car were also the focus of the search. Investigators looked into freezers, garages, basements, and other places where human remains might be stored for a long time. There were significant concerns over Celeste's length of death and the location of her body's storage given the advanced level of decomposition discovered in that Tesla. This raid's timing was also important. The fact that it happened only a day after Celeste's identity was formally verified suggests that investigators had been meticulously constructing their case and waiting for the ideal opportunity to issue the warrant. The speed at which they moved suggested that they had probably been keeping an eye on the home and obtaining information for a while, perhaps even spying on the residents' arrivals and departures. Observers began to question David's actions more and more following the raid. Days after the search, David broke his lease and effectively abandoned the house in the Hollywood Hills, and movers were observed packing up the house. It was unclear from this abrupt departure if he was attempting to disassociate himself from possible evidence or if he was simply reacting to the significant media attention the case was receiving. He may have been in a panic or had legal counsel advise him to distance himself from the crime site because he left a $20,000 monthly lease and a luxury residence. Concerning information regarding David's inner circle and crew was also uncovered by the investigation. In addition to concerns about how many others in David's company were aware of his relationship with Celeste, the FBI began investigating his bodyguard, Mark Morales, for a possible involvement in the crime. The fact that federal investigators were involved raised the possibility that the case involved interstate connections or other circumstances that made it fall under federal authority, such as the transportation of a minor across state lines. Because Celeste allegedly used false identification to enter age-restricted events, friends in the LA music scene later disclosed that they thought she was David's 19-year-old girlfriend. Celeste was able to maneuver in adult circles while still a juvenile thanks to a complex deceit, which was revealed in this revelation. It also raised questions about how many people were involved in keeping up this fiction and what they might have known about the real nature of the relationship. And I've never heard something so crazy. I've never heard anything so crazy as this story. I say this because there is never a situation where the worst-case scenario is that the person is a pedophile kidnapper who is also someone else, and the best-case scenario is that the person is merely a pedophile kidnapper. Private investigator Steve Fisher's study, which suggested that Celeste might have died from an overdose, but that a crime was undoubtedly committed because she didn't get into that car on her own, was possibly the most detrimental to David's case. Any possible allegations of ignorance regarding Celeste's situation were refuted by Fisher's investigation, which showed that Josh Marshall, David's manager, knew she was missing in 2024. Even if more serious charges are hard to prove, this knowledge of her missing person status and ongoing communication may support charges of harboring a runaway or contributing to a minor's delinquency. After David's mother, Colleen Burke, was spotted leaving a Texas gun store with an AR-15 manual, her first public sighting since the case began, the story took an even more bizarre turn. The timing and nature of the sighting added intrigue to an already complicated scenario, even if there was no proven direct connection to the probe. The image of her exiting the business with what looked to be an unnamed male companion, possibly security, raises concerns about whether the family was simply enjoying their constitutional rights during a trying time or whether they were getting ready for a danger. All of David's promotional activities were halted by his record company, Intercope, while the investigation was ongoing. His management team also went entirely silent. His tour dates got progressively canceled, leaving fans who had booked tickets stranded and the music industry coping with the ramifications of supporting an artist under such serious investigation. Thousands of fans who had been anticipating the rising star's performance were impacted by the cancellations, which reportedly cost millions of dollars. Other musicians who had worked with David started to distance themselves from the issue, which had a cascading effect on the music industry. While other musicians who were supposed to collaborate with him secretly canceled their projects, Kei Uchis declared she was working to delete their collaboration from streaming services. The industry's quick action to disassociate itself from David indicated that there was behind-the-scenes information going around that made the alliance unsustainable. The most recent developments have focused on the cause of death ruling, which remains deferred for comprehensive autopsy results. Legal experts point out that although lesser accusations like evidence tampering or obstruction may still be brought, authorities cannot move forward with murder charges until forensic evidence confirms the homicide. The obvious question of why David hasn't been brought in, at least for interrogation, will be asked by many. Without an autopsy report regarding the cause and manner of death, law enforcement lacks the information they need to confront or interrogate David. Many people have been irritated by the arrest's delay since they think the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. But seasoned criminal defense lawyers and former prosecutors have pointed out that it takes time to put up a strong case, particularly when facing a well-known defendant with the means to put up a strong defense. Before filing formal charges, the prosecution will probably want to make sure they have a strong case because if they don't, they may lose double jeopardy protections, which would bar them from being charged again. On September 23rd or 24th, 2025, Celeste's body was made available to her family, allowing for funeral preparations and providing some closure to a family that had been in the dark for months regarding their daughter's whereabouts. In Lake Elsinore, hundreds of people have come out for community vigils in honor of Celeste, demanding justice for her death and remembering a young life that was sadly cut short. With social media campaigns demanding justice and accountability, the public's reaction to this case has been strong and mostly unfavorable of David. The issue has also spurred more general discussions about the role of social media companies, especially gaming platforms like Roblox, where the claimed first contact took place, a